In this video, I start with a simple geometry and begin fracturing it using RBD Material Fracture to create interesting visual effects with transparent materials. This video does most of the scene setup and preps you ready for the next part in the video where I start diving into interior noise displacement. If you're confident enough with your Houdini skills, you can try to skip this video and start watching the next video instead. Worst case scenario, you can always come back here. I do find that everyone here is currently learning Houdini at a different skill level, and I'm hoping by splitting the videos into more shorter sections will help tailor to everyone's need. The next video is titled Interior Detailed Noise and will focus on creating interior. The third part of the video is focused on material blending in Redshift. I'm going to start off with a pre-made geometry. Now, this is a very simple crystal-like geometry. Right now, it doesn't really look much like a crystal. It's just made up of a cube that's scaled up on the y-axis. It's just stretched. The purpose of this video is to demonstrate how to use the RBD tools, and I needed something to fracture, and I didn't want it to just do another destruction video. Although there would be a bit of destruction at the end. I'm going to destroy so I'm going to be fracturing this geometry, this supposed to be crystal-like geometry. It actually ends up looking more like an ice-like material. Starting off with a simple geometry. This way it'll be a lot easier, and then we'll slowly add more and more details to this. So we're not going to be rendering this crystal. We're going to be rendering this. Let's go in here. Now let me bring that crystal-like material in here. I'll go there, and it'll be my out shape. I'm not going to explain how I made this crystal. Oh, I kind of spoiled it. I forgot to put it out here. Okay, so this is the one I want to start off with. Well, since I'm here, I might as well just show you. This is what it ends up being like. All I did was add a bunch of spheres all around this stretched cube. So it's originally a cube that got stretched up, subdivided, and stretched up a little bit more to have a sort of crystal-like form. Then I added a bunch of platonic geometries using the copy to points by scattering a bunch of points everywhere. And then using the VDB combine, I cut holes into the original simplistic crystal, general shape of the crystal, or initial geometry. Cut holes into it, turn it back into a polygon. Then I do a bit of attribute transfer here for this section. That's because I wanted to be able to tell which ones are the holes and which ones are the uncut surfaces or primitives of the outside. So I end up using these spheres, and I transfer the attribute from these spheres onto our new geometry that we've cut holes through. It doesn't change this geometry. However, we do get new data. Here, I call it circle holes. So the ones with ones are the spots where it has these holes, and the ones with zeros are these flat surfaces. To illustrate that, I'm going to put a blast down. So this blast, let me untemplate. This blast is separating circle holes that have a value of 1. So I'm isolating the holes right here. So everything here you see in the 3D viewport has a circle hole value of 1. Now if I were to put 0, this is everything that has a circle hole value of 0. So the ones that weren't cut were untouched. This way I can use this attribute to later to provide to shade on, to provide a material on, to use this to apply a different material blending between these two spots, which makes adds a little bit of touch to the crystal or ice-like material. Now this attribute is done on the primitives. I then add an attribute promote to promote it to the points. So it's easier for Redshift. I'm going to be rendering it in Redshift. So it'd be easier for Redshift to read this attribute. So I'm going to come back over here. Now we're going to use, so I'm going to bring in the simple shape first. I kind of spoiled it by bringing in the wrong one. But let's bring in the simple shape and we're going to fracture this. That once you type in RBD, it will bring up all the RBD tools here, which is very handy because we're on the SOP level right now. We haven't created a .NET or anything, and we're able to do all the destruction work. Even the RBD solver is on the SOP level. So this is incredibly handy, and this is a lot easier for someone new to Houdini to get used to. Before there was the .NET, you had to create the .NET, you had to create the RBD simulation inside the .NET, and then you had to come back up a level and create a DOP import and bring all the simulation data, extract all that data, and bring it back into the SOP level in order to render it. Because if you just render the .NET, it won't render properly. This way, everything's on the SOP level. I think this is a lot easier for someone new to Houdini to get used to. So let's start off with the RBD Material Fracture. Now, I really love this RBD Material Fracture. This RBD Material Fracture comes with predefined fractures. So you can fracture it by concrete, fracture it as if it was a glass, wood, or you have your own custom fracture. Now, glass is very interesting, but I'm not going to go over that right now. I'm going to treat this as a concrete. Glass will give you a sort of spider web fracture pattern, which is not what I'm going for this particular geometry. Concrete will give you overall even distributed pieces throughout your whole geometry, which is what I need for this particular scene. So I'm going to pick concrete for here. And as you can see here, primary fracture here. We have 1 and 2. So we can actually fracture it multiple times within the same node. This is super handy. However, there is a downside to this, is that once you start cooking this node, it will cook it all over again. So it is quite CPU intensive. Now I'm just going to fracture it once. I don't need to fracture it twice. So I'm going to take this out by pressing the cross button. So there's only going to be one fracture. Now we can't see that it's doing, we see that it has lines cut out. However, we can't see much of it. So we need our RBD. And there's an exploded view as well. We can use this to sort of give us a better visual of how it's fractured. Before I go into the RBD Exploded View, I'm just going to go over the inputs. The RBD Material Fracture node. The first node is the geometry node. So that's what we plugged in, our simplistic shape. That's what we plugged into the geometry. The second one is the constraints. Now, we don't have constraints right at the moment, so there's nothing plugged in here. The third input is the proxy geometry. Now, the proxy geometry will be the more simplistic geometry, the ones without details. This will be used in the simulation. The RBD tools will automatically swap the proxy geometry for your high quality geometry, which will be this one plugged into here. This will become more apparent when I start explaining the RBD Interior Detail node. I'll explain that in just a bit. The fourth one will be extra Voronoi points, which is what we're going to be using right now. But before that, let's add the RBD Exploded View. If you hover the mouse over here, you can start to see the lines form. So just hover your mouse close to the output of the previous node that you're trying to connect to. It'll automatically connect all 3 nodes, and then press left click the mouse. It'll automatically connect all 3 of the inputs for you. Otherwise, you'll need to do it manually. Like, you'll have to click and drag it yourself. So this is a nice shortcut. So this is a very simple fracture. Let's go back to the material fracture. Now I want more pieces. I want more fractured points. Here we have cell points inside the primary fracture. scatter from automatically scatter. So this actually has a Voronoi fracture within this node. If you remember from previous videos I did, we would have, actually I can show it to you. So we start off with our geometry. So this is how what we used to do it, the old fashioned way. Put down ISO offset, then put down the Voronoi fracture. Oh, sorry, ISO offset, and then put down scatter points. So we could have interior points inside the geometry, and then put down a Voronoi fracture. So the Voronoi fracture, the geometry we're trying to fracture, and then the points, which is our scattered points over here, and this is what we get to fracture it. So let me colorize this. So this is our pieces. So this is the old way of doing it, the old-fashioned way. With the RBD Material Fracture, all of this is done for us. So I'm just going to move this aside. So this is only for to demonstrate. This is the actual way we're going to use. So material fracture. Oh, this kind of came over. Turn that off for now. In the material fracture, we can achieve the same thing just by changing this number. So the scatter points, it automatically scatters, does the ISO offset, does all that stuff to achieve this similar result. Now say if I want more pieces, let's go 50. Randomly scattering 50 points. Just like the same way we're doing it here. Except this scatter, it's doing 1,000. So let's see what happens if I do 1,000. There we go. This is scattering it by concrete, as if it was a concrete material. This Voronoi fracture is not fracturing it as if it was any material. It's just doing a random scatter, a random fracture. It's not doing it in any particular way. The RBD material fracture has different materials for us to select. So we can try and do the glass to see what it looks like. This might take a while. Okay. So it's fracturing it as if it was glass. It doesn't make much sense right now because this is mainly for a sheet of glass. It'll look a lot better. Wood, so you're gonna see like splinters. There you go. So you see splinters of wood being fractured like this. So I'm gonna be using the concrete. So I just want a very simple fracture. Now we can still control this fracture. I want to control it by inputting my own points. So let's go to the RBD Material Fracture, and I'm going to go to Primary Fracture, and I'm going to put 0. So there's no scatter points. There's no fracture. That makes sense. I want to put in my own points. I'm going to turn this up. Okay, there we go. Now I want to add 2 more points. So this is our material. I want to add 2 more points. Go up here and another one. So we have something even. I'm going to stick that in the Voronoi, the 4th input of the RBD material, which is the extra Voronoi points. Now in order to activate it though, so it's still not fracturing. It's not using these points. In order to activate that, you have to go to the primary fracture, choose one of the fractures that you want, and cell points, there's an input points. You have to turn this on. Okay. Now it's just splitting it in half. Now let's try turning this off. Now, because there's no scatter points, so it's not fracturing it. So it's doing something. However, I only have 3 points. I only have 3 points right now. So that's not enough. So let me put this here. I'm gonna add a point replicate. And what this will do, it will replicate more points. It will clone the points on this add. On these 3 points, it will duplicate the points around that area. This will create 3 clustering groups of points. So we're getting a mess right now. Well, the shape is right now, it's a box, but I want a smaller, it's creating a box-like cluster for each point that was plugged in here. So each of these adds here, it's creating a box of points here, here, and here. What I want to do is lower this size. So now you can start to see what it's doing. It's creating 3 box-like clusters of duplicating points in those areas. So I want it to be a little bit bigger. Okay, I think that's good. So you can start to see that it's really clustering quite a bit. We have this being fractured quite a lot more now. Let's take a look here. We have a lot more points. A lot more pieces now. However, this is a little too much. I'm going to lower this down. For the point replicate, go to quantity. You can lower the points per point. Let's try 50. Okay, let's stick with that for now. In order to show you what I'm trying to achieve, I'm going to start with the material. I'm going to put a null down here first. This is what I want to render, because I do not want to render the RBD Exploded View. This is only for debugging purposes, so I'm going to give it a color, a black color for the node. This is what I'm going to render. So I'm going to start putting a material on this in order to show you what I mean. So I'm sticking with the shop, which is, I know it's quite deprecated. It's just easier for me if I go to here, RS, to list all the Redshift materials here. As opposed to if I go to the material, if I go like this, RS, a bunch of stuff comes out. It's just easier for filming. I'm going to drop down to RS material. I'm going to choose glass. Go back up to the object level. I'm going to add the material to this fractured crystal. Let's go here. Shop crystal. Add a camera. Let's zoom in the camera. I also need some light. I'm gonna add a Redshift dome light. Okay, let's do this. Oh, I also need to do Redshift render nodes. I'm gonna turn off the IPR because I want it to render a little faster. I want everything to appear all at once. Give this a try. So it's way too bright right now. Okay, so I'm gonna turn off the background for the dome light. I'm gonna turn this a little so it renders a little faster. There we go. So already we're starting to see glass-like material. I'm gonna make 10. I'm gonna give this 1 and then exposure of 0.8 and a tint of. Well, for one thing, we have too many fractures. Now I'm going to show you what this looks like if we did not have a fracture and we just render it as is. Okay, I'm going to put the render flag on. So without the interior fracturing, this looks pretty bland, very boring. There's nothing for the light to bounce off in the interior. After fracturing it here, so that would be this. Fracturing here, so we have all these pieces, interior pieces broken up here. It looks a lot more interesting already, but this is way too many pieces that I want. I'm gonna lower the number of points that we're feeding into the RBD Material Fracture node. Okay, I think this is a bit better. So now I'm gonna be adding more and more to this. So let's stop this render for a minute. Let's add some interior noise. As of right now, this geometry is being fractured with flat sides. These pieces are flat. They're cut, they're flat cut. There's no detailed in the inside primitive. There's no details on this. So RBD Tools has something called RBD Detail Interior, I believe. Interior Detail. RBD Interior Detail. This will create some displacement in the interior primitives, which will create a much more interesting. I'm going to shake this loose, okay? And then I want to attach it here. Now the RBD interior, it starts off with how much detail do you want the interior noise to be? So let's take a closer look over here. This is the outside over here. I can actually color it to make it more clear. The RBD Material Fracture also creates inside and outside primitives. So if you go to your geometry, RBD Material Fracture node, it has this split drop down. So this is very similar to the vellum nodes, where it splits it off, which is these three outputs: your geometry, your constraint, and your proxy geometry. So that's what this is: your geometry, constraint geometry, and your proxy geometry. So it will show you the attribute data according to these three outputs. If you ever want to visualize it on the 3D viewport, throw down a null, hook it up to say I just want to see the geometry, which is not very interesting because that's exactly what we're seeing right now. But say I want to see the constraints. Let's hook this null up to this middle one. This is the constraints we're getting. So we can actually view it. We can visualize it. Now, if I wanted to see the proxy geometry, you can always hook this up over here. In this case, it's not very interesting because it's exactly the same as our original geometry. We're going to get into the proxy geometry because the interior detail will make proxy geometry for us. In the next video, I add interior details and noise displacement to create different light refractions and create more interesting renders. Please check out the next video titled Interior Detailed Noise, link in the description. Thank you for watching and sticking to the end.